So we are rocking and rolling now. All right. So this morning we're going to talk about some CSS topics. This afternoon we're going to do CSS as well. So hopefully today will be a little bit of a breather for you guys. Maybe you guys can concentrate on doing something a little bit more front-endy and design-oriented versus thinking of the logic of JavaScript. So hopefully today will be a little bit of a breather for you guys. And these are our objectives for today. So we're going to focus on CSS, specifically the box model and element spacing. Who is familiar with the box model? I'm pretty sure that was in your fundamentals, your pre-work and such. Okay, cool. So these are our objectives. We have 6 objectives we want to get through today. We want to define the elements of standard layout and why they don't work on the web. So we'll talk a little bit about standard layout. We're going to diagram the box model. We're going to list and define the different ways to display an element, differentiate between units of measure in layout, describe some common techniques used in layout, and then list the different ways an element can be positioned in our HTML document. So to start, let's talk a little bit about the first objective, defining elements of standard layout and why they don't work on the web. So is anyone familiar with or comfortable with like Photoshop and other photo editing tools, pieces of software stuff? Okay, cool. So in those pieces of software, the standard elements of layout, we generally only deal with 2 concepts. We deal with dimensions, like the height and width, how big is this image or this piece of content, and then also position, top and bottom. So where are we going to position this content or this element within this Photoshop page and such, the layout of what we're building. So generally we only have to think about 2 things when we're playing around with Photoshop and other layout tools. Obviously HTML and CSS and laying out front end is a little bit more involved. So why can't we simply use dimension and position in layout and call it a day? Well, some issues with this is that traditional layout properties, the issue with traditional layout properties is that elements on a page are dynamic, meaning they can change. And hopefully we're building our apps to be dynamic and to be very user-friendly and have a great user experience. So number 1, the content of our elements are probably going to change. An example may be different size news feeds on Facebook. So maybe you have a news feed that just has a very small image and maybe some text, and maybe someone else has several images in their feed and maybe a really long article or some article that they're including on that feed. So the feeds are going to vary in size. So if we have explicit dimensions when we code our page, it's not going to be very dynamic and it's not going to accommodate different size pieces of content or news feeds in this example. The other thing to consider is that elements may be added to, removed from, or manipulated within the DOM. So tomorrow we're going to spend the day playing around with DOM and DOM manipulation. It's going to be a lot of fun. But an example of this is, let's say that you're adding items to your Amazon cart. So depending on how many items that you're adding to your cart is going to increase or decrease in size on whatever device you're viewing your cart in. So if you add, 20, 30 items to your cart, it's probably going to, go off the screen. And maybe as you delete items, you want your page to be responsive and adjust accordingly. So it's not very efficient to hard code dimensions when we're talking about front end and web development, as opposed to Photoshop. So those are 2 examples of why we want to think about staying away from traditional layout properties. And today we're going to talk about how to make our pages a little bit more dynamic and fluid and responsive when we're designing our layout. So this leads us into the box model, where we're going to spend a few minutes, give you guys some activity to play around with the box model. I'll put this section into Slack there. So you can see from this image The box model consists of a couple of different sections. We're going to go into these into detail. So we have that central area of the element or the piece of content, and that's referred to as the content. Around the content, we have this other section called padding. Around the padding, we have this other section called the border. And then outside of that, we have something called margin. And these are all configurable in our CSS. Now I have kind of a goofy picture here for an example. So this picture, I don't know if you can see it, doesn't really matter what's inside the picture. It's a pretty old picture. But I feel like this is a pretty good example of the box model. So right here in this picture frame, kind of in the middle, the actual picture itself, we can consider the content, right? Then this particular picture has kind of a matte. We see this a lot with pictures and such, like this little white area, kind of a matting that hugs right around the content. So that would be considered padding if this were a HTML element. The picture frame itself, actually put this into Slack. What would you guys consider this picture frame itself? This beautiful gold, lovely, very expensive picture frame. Yeah, absolutely.
Border.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so you could consider this the border of the element or the picture frame. Now we can't really see the margin, right? So the margin is everything outside of this picture frame. It's a little bit theoretical, but let's pretend that I have like 20 of these types of pictures and I want to lay them all out on my wall and make a nice little collage or something. Now, the reason that the box model is so important to think about is because if I have a limited amount of space on my wall and I'm measuring the wall and I'm trying to lay out, let's say, 20 pictures in a nice orderly fashion, if I only accounted for this content when I'm measuring out my wall and dimensions, it's probably not going to turn out too well for me, right? Because what I need to consider is not only the picture itself, the content, but the entire box model, if you will. So I need to account for this border, the padding. I need to account for the border. If I'm going to put these on the wall, I need to account for the entire dimension of this object, right? I can't only consider the content. Otherwise, it's going to be really janky on my wall. So this is the same principle when we talk about laying out our front-end pages. It's really easy to sometimes consider, hey, I want to put an image on my page, and my image is, let's say, 100 by 100 px. So I'm good to go. Well, you have to also consider, is there padding? Is there border also attached to that piece of content? And if so, you need to account for that. So any element on your page, it's not only the piece of content that is visible, it's also the padding and the border and the margin that surrounds it. So conceptually, if you think about the box model, we need to account for all of these properties when we think about layout. How do you guys feel about that box model? Give me a thumbs up. That makes a little bit more sense. Cool. So let's take a look at another example. I want you guys to go to the GA website, which is General Assembly. I'll put it into Slack. So let's go to this website and we'll play around a little bit and see the box model in action. I am going to share my screen, so beware of that. Actually, give me a thumbs up on camera. I'm just curious. Are you guys seeing this exact picture that I have on my screen, or are you guys seeing something different? Give me a thumbs up. So you guys are seeing with these three people? You are? Okay, cool. I was just curious if, because I'm not sure if General Assembly like tracks kind of your location or what, but does anyone want to guess what campus this picture is from? You can put it into Slack.
New York.
No, not New York.
San Francisco.
Nope. Not Seattle.
Atlanta?
You have like 10 more guesses. Yes, this is actually Atlanta right here. If you're ever in the Atlanta area, we are the kind of the envy of GA. We're very, very fortunate to have a beautiful space with very high ceilings. It's very spacious. We really have a pretty campus here. And yeah, this is an image of the campus. So I wasn't sure if it's like tracking my location or if this is all over all the sites. So anyway. All right, let's take a look at the box model. Oops, I clicked on the picture. So we're going to go a little bit into DevTools in the morning. DevTools, the Chrome DevTools specifically, that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time as developers to debug, to run JavaScript in the JavaScript console. But let's take a look at one feature briefly this morning and see how the box model comes into play. So go ahead and open up your DevTools. So the shortcut for that is Command-Option-I. You can also go the menu at the top if you click under View and then Developer and then Developer Tools. You can get there as well. But obviously we prefer that you get used to using these shortcuts. Now what I want you guys to do is we're going to just take a quick peek. We're going to test drive this little section right here, this Pursue a Career That You Love. So what I want you guys to do, go right here in the DevTools, click on this far left-hand icon. So this is the inspect element. And what this allows you to do, I like to think of this as finding a needle in a haystack. This is a very handy tool because if I want to find a specific HTML DOM element in this page, instead of digging down through this haystack of HTML code here, this is really handy because I can click on this arrow, this inspect element icon, and I can click on any element on this page and it will point it out for me down here. So what I want you guys to do, you guys will get really good at this stuff. Just gently hover over. I want you guys to hover over not just like this H1 or the P or the button, but see if you can kind of hover right outside it. I want to grab this entire div that contains all of these elements. So just sometimes you have to be really kind of surgical about it and gentle, but see if you can hover so you see this div highlighted, and then go ahead and click on that once you get it. And you should notice down here, kind of in the Elements tab, you should see that it highlighted a specific div. So the DevTools just gave us a really handy way to find that needle in a haystack. So hopefully, and you can hover over it down here, kind of in the HTML DOM area, and you should see that it'll highlight right up here in the browser. Now, once you click and highlight on that, what I wanted to pay your attention, or draw your attention to, come right over here to the right-hand side of your DevTools, and I want you to scroll down all the way to the bottom. Does anybody want to take a gander at what this little area is here at the bottom of this DevTools section? You can go ahead and put it into Slack. What are we looking at right here?
The box model?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, the DevTools actually makes this really user-friendly. So we have a rendered version. This is what the browser's interpretation of the box model for this particular element. So if we look at the details, so what is the four terms that we just walked through when I held up the picture? What is this middle area that I'm highlighting with my cursor? It says 292 by 320. What do we call
Content?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this is the content. So this innermost portion, this is the physical picture inside the picture frame, right? Then right outside that, if you hover over to the padding section, we can see that this has padding of 32 px on the top and the bottom, and 54 px on the right and the left-hand side. You also notice that if we hover over padding here in the box model area, if you look at the rendered browser window, you can also see that you have like a little green kind of outline around that piece of content, around that section that says pursue a career that you love. So that's the padding for this element. It looks like this element doesn't have any border, which is fine. And it also looks like it doesn't have any margin. So that's fine. We're just kicking the tires here. But let me ask you this. So let's say that I'm laying out this page. When I look at this div that we just highlighted, what is the total width and height that I need to account for with this particular element? And you can put that into Slack. I know I don't want you guys to do math this morning, I apologize, but we see how big the content is, but what must we really account for in total? Yeah, perfect. The content plus the padding. So what would those dimensions be in this example for this div? You can guesstimate if you want. And you can put it into Slack. What is the total space that this element is taking up in my layout? Dana says 400 by 386. Yeah, that sounds about right. So we have to account for the entire box model is the point. So the width is going to be 54 plus 292 plus 54 again. So yeah, I'll take your word for it, Dana. That does sound like 400. I'm pretty good at doing that in my small brain, but yeah, that's right, 400. And then, so go ahead.
When I hovered over it,
yeah.
I want to make it stop. When you hover over it, it comes up with the div ID, part of the masthead, and it's got its total dimensions of 400 by 386 pics.
Oh, when you hovered over in here.
I hovered over it and I get div.masthead underscore masthead underscore details. It gives me the whole line, and it also gives me its total width.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So that's another shortcut you can use. So if you select that element, what Dana's referring to, well, kind of goes away. If you hover over that element itself, you guys can see here. I can't highlight it, otherwise it's going to leave the screen. But you should see here when I select that element that it does give you kind of the total computed height and width for that element. Yeah, so very good. Or if you want to do it longhand, you would just need to consider the left, the right padding plus the content, the top, the bottom padding plus the content as well. Now, the other thing that you can do here is instead of, if I was playing around with this layout, we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. A really great feature of the dev tools that you guys are probably savvy on already is that instead of hard coding these values in my actual CSS file and re-rendering the page and experimenting, the other cool thing that I can do is, let's say that I wanted to change the left padding. Let's say that I wanted to see what this would look like with like 100 px of padding. So I could just double click this value and enter in something and experiment with it. And it's very, very quick and easy. And it's a lot easier than going into my CSS and trying to guess at something and then coming back and refreshing the page. So these dev tools are a really great sandbox to try to experiment with your code. So let's say that the padding on top, you know, maybe I want to make it double, like, you know, maybe 64 px. What would that look like? And then it kind of relays it out in real time, which is really, really handy. Now, what's going to happen if I refresh my page? Are these changes going to persist? So I see some folks shaking their head. Does someone want to? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. So why won't they persist? Why won't these values persist?
Because they are not saved like in the master directory. We're just changing them temporarily, not permanently.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, but what we're actually manipulating is just the DOM, the document object model, which is the browser's interpretation of the HTML and the CSS files that we got from the server out in the interwebs. So if I refresh the page, obviously, I'm going to do another call to the server, get some fresh data, and my browser is going to completely rebake this dish of a website with the fresh ingredients that it went out and got from the GA servers. Yeah, so if I refresh, it's going to go away. And voila, so the page kind of resets and goes back to its normal state. And tomorrow we'll look at some strategies. So hopefully you guys can see the benefit of being able to play around here in the dev tools and experiment. If you find a configuration, or maybe you play around with some rules that you really like, you can also copy these rules and then at that point put it, hard code it into your Atom or Sublime Text or what have you. But these dev tools are just so super helpful, and you can even unclick some of these properties and really see how they manipulate your site. So if I unclick the position absolute, I see that kind of pursue a career that you love div actually goes back behind the image. So it's a really fun way to break down a website. Cool. Any questions about the box model or the handy dandy dev tools that we have at our disposal down here to play around with CSS and box model type stuff? I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Hey, Mark, I don't know if you mentioned this and I missed it, but when you see on the right where you're looking at the styles and some are crossed out, is that because it's got like a class and an IP, and one of the attributes is being nixed because it's inherited from somewhere else or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We talked about that last week, and I always butcher up the pronunciation of that word. But specifically, why is that? Why would a rule overwrite some other rule? We talked about it last week.
I think if you have like a rule for divs that, okay, all divs have a width of 400, but then you give a div like an ID of masthead or whatever, and that has a different width, then maybe the width that we're seeing that's crossed out is the div width, and the width we're seeing rendered is the ID specific width.
Yep, there you go. What word did you just say? The last word.
Specificity.
That's right. Christine's probably laughing at me. I butchered that word like crazy. But yeah, that's absolutely right, Aaron. It deals with specificity. So the more specific a rule, so some of these rules are getting overwritten and crossed out because there's some other rule that's taking priority. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really good. Any other questions about that?
Hey, Mark, just a quick question.
Sure.
Many people probably already knew about this, but for me this is new. Kind of, I saw it on the fundamentals as well. But if everything is out there, what prevents other people from copying and reusing these codes or this coding? And how do you protect like a layout, a specific layout, or there is no protection? You can just go in there and copy paste and change a photo and say, oh, this is my new block, for instance.
Yeah, that's another good question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, so, well, the short answer is in most cases, there isn't a good way to protect that code, particularly front-end code. Now, back-end code is really easy to obscure that because we don't really see that or have access to it. It's kind of a black box type situation. But front-end code, a couple of strategies would be maybe you host that code on some other server, some other website, and maybe you use like an AJAX call or some other device to go get that code and bake it into the site so it's not quite as visible. You could also, I'll see if I can look it up maybe at the break. I know that there's some strategies where you can kind of, I forget the term for it, but you can actually turn the code almost into like a series of unreadable characters and digits and such. Now the browser can interpret it, but when you, with the human eye, look at it, it just looks like gibberish. So there is a way to obscure maybe HTML and CSS content, and particularly JavaScript. I think that's really where that comes into play. If you don't want folks like jacking up your JavaScript, let me look at break on how to do that.
Okay, but then
sorry, go ahead.
then just do the question on another way. So once it's out there,
Yeah.
it's like public. Everybody can just copy paste, and that's it. Nobody else can say, "Oh, this is my code."
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Yeah, that's
For the
pretty
most
much.
part of all.
Now, most people probably, like your average, my meemaw out in rural Alabama, she's not really interested in copying the code, and she certainly doesn't know about the dev tools. But you can absolutely go in here. I could copy here. I'll show you. Let me share my screen one more time.
No, I'm just thinking because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If this is already out there, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, well, so you would need to copy, like if you want to recreate this locally, you could go in here, for example, you can copy this if you highlight the HTML and hit copy. Then you go like into your Atom or some other browser. Let me open up, so we're gonna play around with Cloud9 in a minute. So I'll just open up because I already have this open. Let me, I'm gonna open up a new file. Well, I'll just do it right here. We're just playing around. So I just copied that HTML tag, and then I can go in here and paste it. So this is all of HTML from the GA homepage. And then I could also go in here, and what I'd probably do if I wanted to copy the CSS is I would probably go into sources. And then, so notice like how many, so if you think about a web page as like a finished dish, a meal, if you will, I think of the browser as an oven. And all of the JavaScript, HTML, CSS pages that you get from a server, those are the ingredients. You request those ingredients, and the browser is just a huge oven that bakes those ingredients into this dish that we can consume. So if you see my cursor here, take a look at all of the stuff that goes into this web page. So a lot of this, there's probably some ad information on here. There's probably some Google Analytics information. So it's not just simply HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's a lot of other like tracking and other information going on under the hood. But what I would do if I was going to copy the CSS directly is I would go through here and find the CSS file, and then I would just copy it from there. Actually, if I go to network, so this is normalize CSS. I don't know if we've talked about that yet. Does anyone know what normalize CSS does or is? We're kind of going down a rabbit hole here. I apologize. I'll wrap this up.
All the CSS to like 0, so there's no inherited values for like H1, H2, and everything. Yeah.
So there's normalized CSS. There's also another file called reset.
Oh, is that what I'm thinking of?
Yeah, one or the other. But kind of the gist of those two files is that different browsers have slightly different ways of rendering web pages. So if you look at a page in Explorer and then in Safari, maybe like the margin on the body by default, maybe there's just like 5 px here and there, and it makes the pages just render slightly different. Or maybe the H1 sizing for Internet Explorer is like a 1 px off from Chrome's H1 default sizing. So it's those little really finicky, nuancy differences that files like normalize.css and reset.css, for example, those files try to even the playing field, if you will. So to your point about it kind of resets things to 0, it just compensates for the differences in how browsers render given pieces of content. So ideally, your content will look the same on any browser, any device. That's kind of the goal. These files are open source. They're written by very, very smart people. So you can absolutely go and download them and include them in your app. And I would probably actually encourage you guys to do that because it's a really good best practice.
Mark, I got a question for you. Why is this in networking under CSS instead of in source, like the HTML?
It is in sources. I just didn't want to like dig through it and find it. Network,
Oh.
network just gives you some filters here, so it's a little bit easier to like pinpoint the files. So for example, if
So it has nothing actually to do with networking, like connectivity?
well, the network tab just shows you all of the files that you're downloading. It also shows you maybe the speed. Well, sorry, that's timeline that actually kind of shows you the how fast these files take to load.
Mm-hmm.
But network and sources, so sources just gives you everything in more of a file structure. I just don't want to dig through all this, but you could find the CSS file in here. However, if you go to network, it's a little faster because you can, if I click CSS, let me click all right here. See how these are all of the files that this website grabs from the server to bake into a web page. So there's JavaScript files, here's like some Twitter stuff, there's some ad stuff, there's Google Analytics. But if I just wanted to see the CSS files, I can click on CSS here, and bam, I only have 2 files. So this file, this second one right here, this is actually the official CSS for this website. And I'm guessing because it has some body and stuff, so I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
This is also minified. Does anyone know what minification means?
Have anything to do with how it's all on one line?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we write code, we're generally writing it for other human beings, right? That's why we want our code to be nice and indented. We want nice spacing. We want nice naming conventions for variables and functions and stuff. All that's for like goofy human readability. However, a browser doesn't care what they're named. It doesn't care how it's formatted. So part of minification, and this is a really good strategy when you push your stuff to production, is that you want to strip out all of the white spaces, all of the unessential characters and spaces in that file so that it loads faster. So this file, however many lines of code it is, it's saving you a couple of kilobytes by minifying it in this way. And I'll show you a really quick trick, and then we're going to move forward. But if you guys go in here, go ahead and like select all and copy. So this is all in one line. Like, I don't want to dig through this needle in a haystack, right? But what you can do, I'm going to unshare my screen. And I'm going to open up, go ahead and open up Atom, if you have Atom open. And I'm going to share my screen one more time, and then we'll move forward. This is really good stuff, though. I love like hacking our company webpage. Very black hatty today. So let me share my screen one more time, and I'll show you a quick way that you can decipher if you want to like dig into those rules and try to see what's going on. So I just opened up Atom. I'm going to just do it in this file right here because I have it open. I'm going to delete all this stuff. I'm going to paste in that crazy line of code that I just copied from the browser. Now, when I paste it in, this actually is all one line of code, but I have word wrapping on for Atom, which means that when it gets to the edge of the screen, it's just going to like rewrap it. That helps with readability, but technically this is all like one long line of code. Now, there's a really handy tool that you guys can install, a really good package, if you will, called Beautify. So if I go up to my, let me share my entire screen so you can see me select it. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share my entire browser window real quick, or viewport rather. So if I go up to Atom, I've installed a package called Atom Beautify. And if I click on Beautify, it's actually going to clean up that code for me. So that's a really quick and dirty tip there. If you happen to want to see what it looks like in real time, you could use that package to do so. I usually use that Atom Beautify package because if I get kind of lazy with like my HTML spacing and stuff, that package will clean up all your stuff really, in an instant. It's a really handy tool. Of course, we encourage you to actually maybe not use that and try to get into good practices of spacing and get into that habit. That being said, it's just a lifesaver for sure. But you could use that package, and now it takes that one line of CSS code and beautifies it and shows you what it would look like for human readability purposes. But to Pedro's earlier point, yeah, technically I could I could grab the HTML, I could grab the CSS, I could grab the images, and I could recreate this locally in like 5 minutes. So cool.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really handy tool. And I do that not infrequently, right? So if I'm on a site, I'm like, man, that looks really cool. How do they do that? Again, I don't like encourage folks to like copy code, mindlessly copy code, much less copy code if they don't understand what they're doing, if they don't understand what it does. But let me ask you guys this. How many musicians are out there? Do we have any musicians in the house? Okay. What do you guys play? Sean, Aaron? Guitar, piano, drums?
I've played a little bit of everything. I don't play much of anything anymore, but
Okay.
I've played everything.
Cool. So let me ask you, Aaron, how did you first so do you play guitar? How did you first learn to play guitar? Did you take lessons? Was there some other method?
I started with the piano, so that kind of gives you a base of everything, and then I took lessons for guitar.
Okay, you're not answering my question the way I need it. Sean, let's go to you. Sean, how did you first start playing guitar or piano? Like, how did you first learn?
Initially, when I picked it up, I just started playing it by ear. I would listen to other stuff. I would analyze it. I would imitate, and then I would build off of it. So I think initially you imitate, so then you can innovate. You know, it's kind of like reinventing. Chevy didn't invent the wheel, but they got it to a point and then developed off of it. So.
Yeah. And Aaron, I'm sure like that's your process as well. But like when I first started learning guitar, I just like picked songs that I really enjoyed and I tried to figure out how they did it, figure out the chord structure or the licks. And that's kind of the same thing. That's how I look at this with code. Like if there's something that really inspires you, like get underneath and figure out how they did that. And that's a really great way to learn, right? Kind of, I think you used the word imitation there, which is a really good term.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, that was fun. Any other questions about the box model before we actually start doing some code? Cool. This is good stuff. I like it. I like it a lot. So lucky you guys, today we're going to take a stab at using Cloud9. So does everyone have a Cloud9 account? Give me a thumbs up if you have a Cloud9 account. I'm pretty sure we all should be set up with that. Great. Have any of you guys played around with Cloud9 or, okay. Cool, a couple of you? Okay, great. Well, so I figured we'd take this opportunity to start getting comfortable with Cloud9. This is a tool that we're increasingly going to use as we go through the course, but I thought we would try it out today just to start getting comfortable with it. So what I want you guys to do, we're going to create a new Cloud9 workspace, and then we're going to create an index.html page and a style.css page, and that's going to be kind of our sandbox for today. So you guys are going to create a workspace to play around and experiment. The other great thing about Cloud9 is that I'm going to Slack out my version of my code, and you guys can copy it if you need to. So you guys will be able to see my stuff in real time. So if you need to copy something or if you get lost, you will have access to that code. So I want you guys just to hold tight for a second. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to create a new workspace, and then I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to create your own. So I just want to walk you through the process. So guess what? I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to walk through creating myself a new Cloud9 workspace here. So once you log into your Cloud9, you should see something similar to this. So you have all of your workspaces listed. Today we're going to create a new one. So I'm going to click on this box kind of in the top left called Create a New Workspace. So I'll click on that. And you'll come to this screen. So this will give you a couple of configuration options. You can give your workspace a name. Maybe if we're trying to work from a workspace that we're cloning off of GitHub, this is really, really handy. And this is also great. This is going to come into play when we get particularly into the Ruby coverage, Ruby and Rails coverage. But you can, one of the great benefits of Cloud9 is that if I just click on Rails here, for example, it's going to spin up a Rails server, a Rails environment for me from scratch. It's going to do all that configuration for me, which is super, super friendly and very time efficient. It'll also do that for Node as well. But when you get to this area, I'm going to call this box lesson example. You guys can call it whatever you want, but give it a name, and then we're going to select a blank workspace. So we just want a blank, clean slate, if you will. And then you can click on Create Workspace, and Cloud9 is going to bake and spin up a new empty container/workspace for us. And then I'm going to Slack out the URL to my workspace so you guys can have it for reference. I'll also share my screen as we go through this. And then I want you guys to spin up your own workspace for you guys to play around with. And I'll help you through this for sure. So here's my new empty workspace. And right down here at the bottom, this is my terminal window for this particular workspace. So this would be the same thing as opening terminal on your local machine. And what we're going to do is, you can see up here on the left-hand side, I have my folder structure. So right now I have the name of the workspace that I put in there. That's the name of my folder. Down here, I want to touch two files. I'm going to touch index.html and style.css. And then Cloud9 will create those two files right here. And then we'll be good to go. So let's get you guys to that point, and then we'll kind of set up how you want your screen, and we'll move forward. So I'm going to paste these instructions into Slack, and we'll take a few minutes and get set up here.
Sorry, Mark, just one thing. You chose which template? The HTML5?
No, we want to choose the blank template. Yeah, we're doing all this live. Doing it all from scratch, rather. So I just put the kind of the steps into Slack. Create a new Cloud9 workspace, and then once that spins up, go into the terminal window at the bottom of your workspace and touch those two files. And then you can hold tight for just a second if you want. Well, if you want to, go ahead and create the HTML scaffolding with your HTML, your head section, and your body section. And then if you want to link up that CSS, that external CSS style sheet, you can go ahead and do that, but we're going to walk through that here shortly. I just want to make sure that everyone gets their workspace set up. And then to Pedro's point, really important, be sure to select a blank workspace. If you selected like an HTML5 workspace, it's fine. It's not a deal breaker. I just wanted this to be kind of like as bare bones as possible. But that's fine if you like clicked that and already went through the workspace. So no worries. I'm going to come off screen share for just a minute and see if you guys have any questions or issues. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack once you're able to spin up your workspace and you create those two files in your workspace.
It's taking a second to create this container. It's going slow.
Yeah, that's all good.
What was the template we're supposed to use? HTML5 or?
So I put it into Slack. I would prefer that you guys select the blank workspace.
Ah, that was what you're referring to. Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's not really a deal breaker. I just wanted it to be like as stripped down as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, Cloud9 is definitely growing on me, and it's something that we're trying to incorporate more like into the lessons going forward. For some of the stuff we've been doing so far, where we're dealing with like just one script file or like one HTML CSS file, we can pretty much get by with Adam or just sharing our screen. But I wanted to take this opportunity to, the earlier we start getting comfortable with this, the better. We'll be using this a little bit more once we get into more of the full stack type stuff, because it'll be really nice to share the code and you guys can see the code and copy it without us having to constantly paste code into Slack. I think it would just make the process a little more efficient.
I'm a little bit confused. I made the workspace and now we're supposed to create those files. How do we do that in the workspace and find it in the terminal?
So if you look at the instructions I put into Slack, once you open up your workspace, it should by default give you like a little terminal window at the bottom. Are you seeing a kind of a terminal prompts, terminal window at the bottom?
Yeah, is that the one that you were talking about? We create the file in here?
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I thought we were like adding them to our own computer.
No. So that terminal window that you see in Cloud9, that's the same terminal window as if you were running it locally on your machine. So Cloud9 tries to emulate the local experience. So just pretend like you have Atom open, and then that bottom section would be if you had the terminal open locally on your machine. Cloud9 kind of mimics that seamlessly. So when you create those folders in when you create those files in Cloud9 from that terminal prompt, it's actually creating those in the folder, in your Cloud9 folder, and you should see them pop up there on the left-hand side. And remember, all of this is still up in Cloud9. It's still up in the, it's not local whatsoever. So from like a kind of a pragmatic standpoint, it's really nice because just right out of the box, you don't necessarily have to worry like if your machine breaks or if you're going to lose this code because it's already in the cloud, by default. Now, at some point, maybe you do want to push that to GitHub and do it in a more official way, but that's one kind of peace of mind thing is that when you're using Cloud9, I mean, God forbid, like the Cloud9 servers go down, but it's nice and safely tucked away up in the Cloud9 world. Cool, so we have 9 folks, still looking for a couple of more thumbs up. Yeah, so I see Adam has the question, how did you edit the coloring of your workspace? The bright white kills me. And then Christine has some suggestions for that. So just to give you guys a heads up, going forward, we as an instructional team have kind of agreed that we're going to make our Cloud9 environments with a black background. So we're going to try to be consistent about that. And the reason is because if you're looking at our workspace and then your workspace, if they're the same color, it's really easy to get the wires crossed. So I would encourage you, if that white is really annoying, that's cool. But I would encourage you to try to pick a color that's not solid black like we have, like maybe just some sort of off color. Again, just so it's a little easier to keep things straight, if that makes sense. But yeah, that white is pretty powerful. All right, so we've got 14 thumbs up. That's good enough for me. If you're having any issues, please just shoot Christine a Slack message. Just DM her. And I'm going to share my screen again. But let me Slack out my, my repo first. So again, this is the first time we're doing this. I just want to make sure that we get comfortable with the workflow. I'm going to Slack out my Cloud9. And I wanted to build this from scratch with you guys. Going forward, I may have one of these repos already set up. And so when I send out kind of the lesson prompt in the morning, in addition to Slacking you guys the link to the README, frequently I'll go ahead and Slack you guys the link to my Cloud9 workspace. So we're not always going to go through this, kind of setup process. But again, it's just important that we go through this together and try to get on the same page. So I just Slacked out my Cloud9 workspace. So go ahead and click on that. Make sure that you can open it and see it. And I'm going to share my screen again here. Cool. And if you guys are looking at my screen, at my Cloud9, so I'm starting to get notifications that you guys are coming online, right? And I can click on collaborators over here, and I can see you guys kind of coming into my room. Now, Dana wants to get really black hatty and hack my Cloud9, so she's requesting access to my Cloud9. For today's purposes, you guys are just going to have read-only access. At some point in the future, I'm going to grant you guys read and write access so you guys can see some other features of what I'm working on. But today, it's going to be fine if you guys just can read it only. So give me a thumbs up if you're able to open up my link and we only have one file with anything in it right now, this README. So can I get a thumbs up if you guys are able to see my workspace? You can just do it for the camera. So if you guys go into my workspace and you click on my README file, you should see something like this. And I'm actually going to, go ahead. Someone have a question?
Oh, Mark, I can't see it. It like comes up with the pages like kind of blank.
Okay. Do you see the my folder structure here on the left? Do you see that at all?
No.
You
I don't know if
anything?
it's still loading or
Okay.
maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, maybe.
Mine as well took a long time to load, and it's still, I already have the structure, but it's still white.
Okay.
Maybe it's still just loading then.
Yeah, maybe just give it a second, and then you can reload it if you will. That's something else to consider. If this is going to take up, because I know that Zoom, Atom, Slack, we have a lot of kind of memory-intensive programs running on our machine. So if Cloud9 gets to be some sort of bottleneck, we may not use it, but I just wanted to test it out today. So give it just a second and then maybe refresh.
Mark, do you mind if I share my screen just so
Sure, yeah.
I can make sure everyone's screen is set up properly and I am able to see your file? So
sounds good. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if this works. So I'm sharing my screen. Just before we get into this, I want to make sure everyone's screen looks the same. Well, I'm screen sharing right now, but I have Zoom right here. This is Mark's work environment. So if you guys are saying there's nothing here, that's exactly right. Mark should have his index HTML and style CSS. You should have your workspace somewhere on the screen as well. And for those who are asking, your terminal is down here. So that's where we touched our files. And so our space should be kind of mirroring Mark's space, but just make sure you have them separate and you have them both open.
Yeah, and Christine, if you click on the README file.
Yep, you have to double click everything. And it's kind of like Atom, you can close files up here and double click them here to open everything.
Yeah.
Same with your workspace here, you can double click on your README, double click on your style.
So Christine, go back to README. I'm going to delete like a few lines of code, and then so everyone watch Christine's screen. So watching my README, I'm going to delete that last line that says "Happy Coding." Well, I'll delete all of that. Hi there, welcome. I'm going to delete all that stuff. Let me get into it. I'm going to delete that and then save it. And then it should actually push that event out to you guys as Cloud9 that you're watching. So if you just saw on Christine's README, I just deleted all that text. Mm-hmm. And then that was kind of rendered in her browser where she's watching my workspace as well.
Okay, so I'll give you guys another few seconds. I know there's tons of stuff on your screen. So just arrange it so you can see everything clearly.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Cloud9 is just something that we want to. It has the potential to be a really handy, beneficial tool, but if it's weighing down your machine, if it's taking too long, that's totally fine because I'm going to screen share my version anyway, so you can totally see what we're up to. It's just meant to be a device where if you want to copy my code instead of having to go into Slack, you can also just copy it directly from Cloud9. So that's really the main benefit, but you can totally do this in Atom locally if you want. But hopefully this will be a good experience for everyone. Yeah, so some of you guys, maybe it's taking a little bit too long to load, and that's okay. Like I said, if it's kind of painful for several of you, we'll just move forward and you guys can do this in Atom or something. It's no worries. Or actually, you can do it in your Cloud9 workspace and just kind of watch my screen share. You don't have to watch my workspace locally on your computer. It is no worries. So give me a thumb. I'm going to put a message in here. Give me a thumbs up on this message that I'm putting into Slack. I can see Mark's workspace. So give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my Cloud9 workspace locally. Okay, 14. Okay, cool. So again, I'm going to move forward, but you can still play around in your workspace that you just created. If my workspace is really slow or if it's giving you any difficulty, that's totally fine. Just go ahead and like close it down or minimize it. But I'm going to share my screen so you'll still be able to see what I'm doing. So we're not going to miss anything at all. And I'm happy to put any code into Slack directly for you to access it that way. But actually what we're doing this morning, it's not a lot of code. So you should be able to follow along, typing it manually rather. All right, so I'm going to move forward. So let me share my screen. And we're going to get some practice with the CSS principles that we've been talking about. So you guys should be able to see my Cloud9 workspace that I'm screen sharing. And what I want you guys to do, let me show you what I want you guys to set your screen up as. If you go right up here, you should see a little drop down that's kind of to the right of the folder structure. I'm going to show you like how I like to set up my environment visually. If you click on this little drop down right here and scroll down, here's a couple of different kind of visual boxes and configurations. I'm going to click on this one. It's the second one from the right. So what this is going to do is it's going to give me two windows on the left-hand side stacked on top of each other, and then it's going to give me an entire height of my viewport for one other window. So it's going to create 3 windows. So let me click on that. And so now you see like I have 2 boxes here on the left, and then this entire box right here. So that's exactly what we want. I'm going to click on index.html and click on my style.css. I'm going to drag my style.css to this bottom frame and then keep my index.html in this top frame. And in a moment, once we put in some code, Cloud9 allows you to render your HTML code in the browser, kind of a simulated browser. We're going to do that right here on the right-hand side. So that's going to make our environment really efficient, hopefully. So this is how I would prefer, or excuse me, this is how I would suggest that you guys set up your environment. If it makes sense to do it some other way, that's totally cool. So once you set this up, let's go into this index.html file and go ahead and create the scaffolding for an HTML page. So we're going to type in HTML, and you can hit tab, very similar to Atom, right? So we have these really handy shortcuts. So if you type in the word HTML, thanks, Christine, putting in some instructions there. So go ahead and type HTML and hit tab, and it should create the opening and closing braces for that HTML container, kind of the main outline of our page. It'll also throw in this doc-type HTML section in there. Right inside my HTML, I'm going to type in head and hit tab to create our head section. Underneath that, I'm going to hit type in the word body and then hit tab to kind of instantiate that body section. Okay. So what we're doing right now, let's create our HTML head and body sections and then link the external style sheet. So give me a thumbs up in Slack when you have those 4 things completed. So to link up the style sheet, let's go up into our head section and we can type in link and hit tab. And again, that's gonna like auto populate our basic link link tag. And then right here for href, we're gonna put the path to our style.css file. Now, our file is pretty much in the same folder as our index.html, so there's really nothing fancy going on here. For the href, I'm just gonna type in style.css. And so that should link up our style sheet. So give me a thumbs up in Slack if you get those working. And again, just to kind of walk through what we just did, the first thing that I did is I clicked on this little icon right here. It's kind of to the right of where the folder is listed. Looks like a little drop-down selector. So if you click on that, there's a couple of options on how to set up the different window panes in Cloud9. This is very similar to Atom, how if we want to set up different files that we can see at the same time, we can create different window panes for them. So I selected this selection where I have 2 panes on the left and then a big pane on the right. So I clicked on that. Then I double-clicked my index.html file, and I double-clicked my style.css file to open those files in Cloud9. Then I dragged my style.css file to this bottom pane. And that's just how I like to work. I like to have my HTML on top and then my CSS kind of on the bottom. That's just my preference. And then we haven't put anything in this right-hand pane. We're going to do that here shortly.
Hey, Mark?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to be able to see what I'm seeing on the screen share on your Cloud9 that I have left on my screen?
Yep.
Okay, because all I'm still seeing is the blank.
Okay. If you're seeing the blank, yeah, no worries. Let's just move forward right now. Just follow along with my screen share. We'll take a look at that at break. No big deal. Again, the main benefit of this is when we get into more complex situations, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to be able to copy code at your leisure. So instead of like digging through Slack and trying to find some code, you guys can take it upon yourselves to copy and compare the code directly. Make sure you're not missing anything, or if you want to copy some code. So that's the big advantage of using Cloud9. Cool. So let's open up our browser window on the right. And then I promise we're actually going to get to playing around with CSS. So to test this out, go into your body tag and just type in hello world. I'm not even going to wrap it in any tags. Just plain old hello world. And then you guys should see both in your window and then in the window, if you're watching my Cloud9 workspace, you should see a preview button right up here at the top. So click that button and then select Live Preview File. And when you do this, make sure that it says index.html. So you want to make sure that you're in your index.html file when you select Preview. So we're going to select Preview, Live Preview File. And then you should see a window open. And this is kind of a simulated browser Cloud9 window. And then what I'm going to do, guess where this tab is going to go? I'm going to drag this tab to the right. So now I have my HTML file open, my CSS file open, and I have this Cloud9 version, browser version of my code on the right. So this is how I want you guys to set up your environment. So give me a thumbs up in Slack if you successfully open up your browser window.
Mark?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So I just did what you did, but mine does not show hello world. It says unable to update your preview.
Okay.
I don't know.
Same here.
Okay, so give me a thumbs up in Slack if you're successfully able to open your browser window and move it to the right-hand side. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then Sanaz, do you want to share your screen? We'll take a quick peek, and then we're going to move forward.
Sanaz, I think you need to save it first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good point. So Sanaz and everyone else, if you want to take a quick peek, this is the same thing as in, okay, this is the same thing that happens in Atom, right? So Sanaz, you see in your index.html file, you see how you have that little grayed out circle right there where you're pointing. What does that mean? Yeah, right there at the top of the tab. What does that grayed out circle mean, Sanaz? So Sanaz, what does that mean if we see a file tab and it has that solid gray circle?
I'm sorry, I was muted. So it means that the file needs to be saved.
Correct. So go ahead and save that, and you should see an X. So that's pretty much, if you're in Sublime Text, if you're in Atom, but that's a really handy visual tool to see if there's changes that need to be saved.
Yeah.
So Sanaz, go and refresh your browser there.
Yep, thank you.
Perfect. Great work. Okay, cool. Yeah, you're in good shape. All right. So if you don't mind, right there in Slack where I said my browser window is open and on the right-hand side, go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you are ready to cook with gas, if you will.
Sanaz, do you mind to turn off screen share? Thank you.
Cool. All right. I think we're ready to move forward. And so let me put a little bit of an exercise into Slack. So this is kind of our first little exercise. We'll be kind of going through some concepts and stopping to give you guys a second to build this out yourself. What I want you guys to do is, I just put the instructions into Slack. Go ahead and create an element in your index.html page with the following bullet points there. So create some sort of element with some random content. Give it a yellow background, a solid black border, 10 px of padding, 10 px of margin, and then view the page in that Cloud9 browser window. And I'm actually going to do this myself, and we kind of walk through it together. This is just making sure that everything's wired up correctly. So I'm going to share my screen again. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in here where my hello world, I'm going to go ahead and blow that up, get rid of that. And I'm just going to create a p tag. And inside this p tag, so this is a really cool shortcut. We have this in Atom as well. I'm going to put in some lorem ipsum here. So if you type the word lorem and hit tab, yet another handy dandy shortcut is it's going to just barf out some lorem ipsum placeholder text. One other thing is, if you're watching my screen, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but sometimes this can be a little annoying. If this is happening to you, if you look at your kind of rendered browser situation, See how my text is highlighted right here? So we'll get into this later. This is kind of a Cloud9 version of DevTools, which will be handy at some point. Right now, we don't really, sometimes it's just a little annoying to look at. If you want to turn off this highlighting, just because it's kind of an eyesore, what you can do is you can go right up here to the right of your browser URL bar. It's not quite rendering on mine, probably because I've increased the size of my window. But there's a preview settings button. And if you click on that, see this enable highlighting? You can uncheck that and it'll turn it off. So that's kind of an actual, it's actually a really handy feature. We don't really need it on for today. So if that's bugging you, you can turn that off. All right, friends. So we'll put some lorem ipsum or just some dummy text into our HTML. And then let's build a rule down here in style.css. We'll build a rule for our p tag. And then we're going to put the bullet points that we have in Slack. So go ahead and create that on your own. I'm going to do it as well, so you can watch me do it. And this will just kind of get us up and running. Did someone have a question? Okay.
There's something weird and funky going on mine.
Okay. Okay.
If I go down into my style CSS little window,
yep.
It's not letting me type anything in there.
Are you looking at my window? Or are you in?
No, I'm in mine.
Okay.
It looks like you are in Mark's. Look at the URL on top.
I'm in mine. It says Richie Workspace.
Okay.
I have his open as well, but I'm not looking at it.
Again, you are in Mark's workspace. The URL on top says Mark Wright. And also you see about 10 different highlighters, which is the students.
Well, so I'm sharing my screen. Let me get off screen share. We'll take a look.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was Richard.
Yeah, no, that's not me. I was getting really confused. I was like, what?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Richard. Can you share your screen? We'll take a look. And then if you guys want to keep working on the creating a rule for your p tag, and give me a thumbs up in Slack when you add those rules.
If I go up here, fine. Go down here, nothing.
Okay. Close out your style.css and just reopen it.
That was weird. All right, whatever. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to knock out this p tag rule right here. So we'll make a yellow background. I'm going to put a border, a solid black border. And I'll give it 1px. Let's see. We'll give it padding. Ten px. We'll put a margin on here of 10px, and then we'll view the page. So again, we just want to test out that our style sheet is linked correctly before we move forward. So I added those goofy rules, and let me go back over here and refresh my index.html. So you guys should see something similar to this. We just want to make sure that the rules that you created is affecting the browser side. We just want to make sure that you have those two files linked up. So give me a thumbs up in Slack. I see 7 thumbs ups. So go ahead and keep that party rolling if you're able to see something change here in your browser window. Yeah, thanks, Christine. Make sure that you save both of the files and then make sure that you hit refresh on the browser window. The little kind of refresh arrow right here. My browser is updating in real time for some reason. So that's cool. Cloud9 actually does do that in some circumstances. I found that as well. Yeah, so that's actually great. Yeah, that's a really handy feature. Maybe mine will start doing that too. I forget if I have to turn that on or if it's just kind of default. But anyway, that's awesome. All right, so I see 11 thumbs up, so we're pretty close. I'll wait for maybe 2 or 3 more folks, then we'll move forward with the lesson. Aaron says, my Cloud9 is not running well, going to restart my computer. So Aaron, that's totally cool. If you want to, again, if you want to do this locally in Atom and stuff, that's totally fine. If Cloud9 is giving you some issues.
I'm going to do that on the return, but I got a message saying my CPU was like reaching its max, so I think I'm just going to start fresh and
yeah.
Hopefully everything will run a little bit more smoothly. I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, that's cool. And just ping Christine if you need to catch up with anything.
Would you peg again in the Slack the link for Zoom so I can just log right back in when I come back?
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks.
Hey, Mark, just curious about one thing. Do you guys use laptops or desktops over there?
Sorry, you're breaking up just a little bit. What was the question?
Over there, do you guys use laptops or desktops?
Oh, I use laptop.
Okay, MacBooks Pro, I guess.
Is yours pretty slow?
No, it's still okay, but you know, I hear the fan and it seems like it's going to take off my laptop, you know.
Yeah, you have like a hair dryer situation going on.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. All right,
Pedro?
Sorry?
You can get like one of those little laptop razors. That's what I use. I was having that problem too. And then I just elevate it. It like elevates the laptop up off the desk and the fan doesn't kick on like that anymore.
Well, what I have is I have a cooler beneath it. So I have the laptop plus 3 fans, 2 fans beneath from the cooler. Because otherwise, when I put my finger, you know, above the keys on the laptop, it kind of doesn't burn, but it's very hot.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit later if we can, Pedro. So we have about an hour till lunch, so I'm gonna kick this up a notch. If you guys are having any like really pressing issues, I'm gonna ask you to ping Christine. Otherwise, I want to try to get through this content before lunch. After lunch, we're gonna have some good lab time for you guys to kind of go into breakout rooms and work on this yourself. But let's see if we can get through some of these CSS topics before lunch. So we'll walk through a couple, and then I'll give you guys a little bit of exercise time, and maybe we'll kind of work a break, a little bit of a stretch time into that as well. So I just pasted into Slack kind of the next topic I wanted to discuss. Let's talk about additional properties in CSS. So a couple of the kind of the greatest hits here. Some of the properties we have available are height and width. So if we want to explicitly define the height and width of an element, we can certainly do that with the height and width properties. Box sizing. So there's 2 values for the box sizing property. One is content box, and then one is border box. So kind of, I'm going to use my photo as an example again. So we talked about earlier that when you're making rules and such for your, you know, some sort of piece of content, that you need to keep in mind that this element is not just the content in the middle, but it also is the padding and the border that surrounds it. So we'll take a look at an example here in a moment, but what box sizing does is if I say I want this element to be 100 px wide and 100 px tall, box sizing allows you to be explicit and say, do I want this entire picture frame and everything within it to be constrained by 100 px by 100 px? Or when I say 100 px by 100 px, do I just mean the photo, the content inside it? So it gives you a little bit of a configuration there, and we're going to see an example of what that does, but sometimes that's a really handy way to get around that box model type situation. If your entire box model is blowing up, you can certainly put some constraints on it to make it fit within your layout. It's a really great property, box sizing. And then finally, overflow. So occasionally, and we're going to see this with this lorem ipsum text, there's a lot of text in here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can hide some text if the text is bigger than the box that it's contained in. A couple of the values that we have for overflow are visible, which is the default value for overflow. Hidden, so what if we want that text, once it exits the box dimensions, maybe we just don't want to see it at all. Scrolling, so maybe if you want to see scroll bars to scroll through the text. And then auto. So auto is like scroll, but only if there's too much content. So you're kind of giving your CSS the option to make that decision on a case-by-case basis, which can be really nice. So that brings us to some activity time to practice this. Let me paste this into Slack. So again, let's take like 5 or 10 minutes. I want you guys to work through these through these 10 kind of challenges. And let's do this. Let's take 10 minutes for this. I'm also going to walk through these so you can watch me do it. But go ahead and stretch your legs. If you need to run to the restroom, get some coffee, go ahead and do that. And we're going to take 10 minutes for break time / working through these 10 challenges. Okay? So we're going to regroup at 12:43. And I'm going to continue to screen share, and I'm going to work through these as well. So if you get stuck, you can kind of watch my code as well. So I'm going to put break / exercise time, and let's meet back at 12:43. Okay, so I'll see you guys shortly. I'm going to grab some coffee myself, but I'll continue sharing my screen for the moment. Actually, I will turn off my screen share momentarily so I can mute myself. So I'll see you guys shortly. Alrighty. Cool. So I just created 2 dummy divs with 2 pieces of text. And again, a div element's default behavior is to take up an entire line. So it's a block element by default. Certain other elements, actually, can you think of an element that we talked about that is an inline element? Maybe a particular tag that doesn't require that everything before and after it appear on different frames, different planes, rather. So there's one tag that we talked about. What if we want to add some sort of styling to one specific word in a sentence or a few different words?
Span.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so span's a really good example of an inline element, right? It's not a diva, but divs are divas. So the default behavior for a div is it's just going to push everything else out of the way. Now, we can set the display property to inline. So if we want to make those blocks, if we want to change their default behavior, make them play nicely and sit up next to each other, we can add an inline rule to it. So down here in my CSS, again, you guys will have an opportunity to do this in a minute if you just want to watch. But I'm going to create a rule for all of my divs down here in my style.css. Excuse me. So let's change this display to inline. And I'll save that, and let's refresh. And now you can see, actually, I'm going to put, so we can see this a little bit better, let me put a border property on here too. Hopefully this will help it stand out a little bit more. So if I refresh here, so now you can see that I add that inline property, inline display property, that now these 2 divs, they're lining up next to each other. So I'm basically telling them not to do their default behavior, which is to stack or be a block element. I'm making them inline. The next thing I want to show you guys, one more example. So I want to show you guys the difference between inline and inline block. And to do that, I'm actually going to add an image here. By the way, I think this is really interesting. In Cloud9, when I have it create an image tag, when I do img and hit tab, so image is a self-closing tag, right? But for some reason, it actually gives us a closing tag for image. I think Maybe we can do a pull request, fix that bug with Cloud9. I think that's really interesting. Let me just pick a Google image for Riri. Let's find an image to snag real quick. Try to find one kind of smaller sized. Let's do this. So this is 300 by 300. That'll work. Let me copy this. So I'm just going to copy the URL, slap it here in my image tag for the source, and there we have Rihanna in here. So the reason I'm putting some other element in here is because I want to show you guys the difference between inline and inline block display property. Basically, it boils down to this. The inline property does not respect the top and bottom margin or padding for a given element. So in this example, we're using display inline. And if I put a margin on here, let's say that I want to create a little bit of space around my two red divs. When I'm using display inline, notice that the margin appeared to the left and the right of my elements. However, the top and the bottom were ignored. This is kind of a small thing, but just something to keep in mind. Now, the next display value of inline block, if I change these divs to display inline block and refresh my page, so just notice the difference. Now with inline block, the top and the bottom are being respected. So those margins are now actually, well, they're being respected. Inline block will respect my wishes for the top and bottom margin. So just a really small difference, but just something to consider. Inline and inline block. And then finally, if you want to remove an element entirely, you can do display none. So if I change the display to none on my divs and then refresh, those divs disappear. Now, the question then becomes, why do we even need to display none? If I don't want something to show up on my page, I'll just delete it from my HTML. Like, I'll just get rid of it directly. So can you guys think of a reason why this display none property and value may be helpful?
We may want to use that property later. We just want to save it for later.
Yeah, that's a really good, yeah, that's excellent. I think that's Sanaz. I only see 4 pictures here at the bottom. But yeah, that's a really good point. So when we get into click events, maybe with jQuery, Sanaz, would you mind muting your mic, please? Thank you. Yeah, so maybe when a page first renders, we want it to not display. So we want a display of none. But maybe when we click a button or we hover over something, maybe we're going to write some JavaScript that will make that element appear. And essentially underneath the hood, it's going to change that display property to block or inline or something. So that display none is actually going to come in really handy when we get to DOM manipulation, particularly with jQuery. jQuery has a lot of really handy methods like show and hide. So if you click something, it'll show it. Click again, it'll hide it. So that display property is really handy. And that leads us to an activity that I am putting into Slack. So let's take a few minutes. Go ahead and walk through these 10 challenges. Again, there's a lot of refreshing the page. So just do what it says and then refresh the page and just observe the behavior that we're changing. So we'll take a few minutes for that, and I'm going to do this as well if you want to follow along. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack once you complete those 10 challenges. Thanks. Cool. So while you guys continue to work, so Zach asked a little bit earlier, is there ever a reason to use only inline then? Inline block looks so much better. So yeah, I probably most of the time I use inline block. I guess maybe a particular scenario, maybe if you're dealing with like a nav bar or something. So a nav bar, maybe you don't want to adjust the top and bottom margins of a nav bar because maybe you still want it to be on the top. You know, maybe you want it to hug the top of the browser. So maybe that'd be a situation where you'd want to do a display inline for some sort of nav scenario, or maybe a footer as well, where you know that you don't really want to adjust like the top and bottom of something. So those may be two use cases. Farouk asks, what does it mean by filler text? Just some dummy text. So in my example, I just typed in lorem plus tab. Yeah, thanks, Zach. Cool. So maybe just a few more thumbs ups, and we'll move forward. Okay, cool. So we have 14 thumbs ups, so that works for me. I'm going to move forward to this next section, which is differentiating between units of measure in layout. So hopefully we're all pretty familiar with like px for pixel, but there's several other really good options for units of measure with CSS. So obviously the first one is px for pixel. It's the most basic unit. EM, who's heard of EM before or used EMs? Cool. So EM is a proportional type of measurement. It's a proportion of the element's font size. So for example, if the element's font size is 16px, 0.5 EM or half an EM would be 8px. So the thing to consider with EMs is that it's a proportional unit of measurement. Quick nerd alert here. Does anyone know the default size of an EM for a browser? Generally, most browsers have a default font size. You can put it into Slack too. What's the default font size for an EM? $18, that's close. 14, all right, let's split the difference there. Cool, pi, yes. Sanaz hit it on the head. So the default EM for most browsers is 16px. So that's the default size. Does anyone know why 16px is the default size for an EM? Does anyone know where EM comes from, that unit of measurement? Back in the olden days. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so back in the Gutenberg typesetting days, an EM 16px was the size of an M, the character or letter M. So that's kind of where the EM originated from. Cool. REM, excellent band, right up the road here in Athens. An REM is a proportion of the browser's font size, or a font size that you put on the HTML tag or HTML element of the page of the browser. And each browser has a default font size, usually set on the body tag or HTML tag. So EMs and REMs, they're a little, it's really hard to like describe. So we're gonna actually walk through it and see an example so you can get a sense of what they do. But the important thing to take away from EMs and REMs is that it's a proportional unit of measurement. So if you use EMs and REMs and things are proportional, again, if you think about different browser sizes, different sizes of a device that people may view a site on, proportional is a really smart way to design your layout because it's going to be proportional. And then finally, percentages. So it can be a percent of different attributes depending on the property it's assigned to. So percentages and proportions, two really smart strategies for designing your layout. And then you can see here, height, width, padding, border. It doesn't even work with border. And then margin is similar to padding. You can use percentages there. There's another one that isn't listed here. I'm just going to put it into Slack. Does anyone know what VH and VW stand for? This is one of my like increasingly favorite units of measurement here. VH and VW. Does anyone know what those stand for? Yeah, so it's definitely something height and something width. And this is something if you want to Google this later on. Yeah, so VH equals viewport height, and then VW is viewport width. Yeah, so these are two kind of newer units of measurement, and they're from 0 to 100. So it's kind of a percentage, kind of a proportional type thing, but it's becoming increasingly popular because viewport refers to, you know, whatever device you're looking on, whatever the size of the viewport on the device that you're, you know, observing a page. And it's 0 from 100. So 100 would be no matter what device I'm looking on, this piece of content is going to take up 100% of the viewport height or width. So again, it's not a percentage, it's a number from 0 to 100, but it does act like a percentage-based type of measurement. So if you want to check those out later, those are really good ones as well. And that brings us to an activity. So I'm going to walk through this. I'll kind of talk out loud and we'll walk through this together just in case there's any questions. Sometimes this EM and REM can be a little, again, you don't have to like know this stuff chapter and verse, but sometimes it can be a little tricky. So let's walk through these together. So the first thing we want to do is let's create a P tag with those 5 kind of bullets right there. And I'm going to do this as well. So I'm just going to kind of clear out my body and my style.css. So I'm going to create a P tag with short random content. So WDI remote online interwebs. Oh, let me refresh, get rid of that lorem. There we go. Cool. And down here in the style, let's put a little bit of decoration on that thing. So let's put a solid black border around our P. And some padding. and some margin. Yeah, and that's all for that first one. And then, yeah, if you want to like get rid of any other rules or anything else in your body, just to kind of make some space. Excellent. Okay, so let's view the page. So we should have like this 1px black border around the content and some padding and margin. No big deal. No big whoop. All right. So now let's set the padding and the margin to 1 EM. So remember that 1 EM, EMs are a proportional state of form of unit. So we'll do 1 EM for both of those, and then go ahead and save the file, and then try to, observe what happens when you refresh the page. So when I just refreshed my index.html, I got a little bit more spacing, right? And I'm going to inspect the element here, just so I'm going to take a look at the box model actually, just to observe the difference. So if I hover over this P tag right here, and then if you guys can see my box model here, you guys can do this as well. But notice that my padding, I put in 1 EM, and here in the box model, it's showing up as 16px. So that's what we discussed earlier, right? So kind of the default, if you don't explicitly state what you want an EM to be, the default for 1 EM is going to be 16px. And so we can see that here in the box model. So it's kind of cool. We put in 1 EM into the code, but the browser rendered it as a unit of a px, unit of measurement here for the box model. It's kind of interesting. But here, if we look at the the specific rule for P, here it's still listed as an EM, right? So just something to consider. I think that's kind of neat. I'll go ahead and get out of that. All right, so we set it to 1 EM. Okay, now let's increase the font size on our P tag. Let's declare that. Let's declare a font size of 34px. Whoa. Cool. So now that we declared a font size, this EM is proportionally going to be tied to the font size on this element that we specified. So now you can put this into Slack. What is 1 EM going to equal on our P tags? What is 1 EM going to equal? 34. That's exactly right. So if we change this to like 100, refreshed, so it's going to be a proportional unit of measurement for that tag. Excellent. Cool. So that's EMs. Now let's take a look at REMs. So we're going to set the padding and the margin to 1 REM. And let's see if we can lose our religion, right, guys? No? No? 2 on the nose? Okay. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can stand when we refresh the page. I'm going to stop. So we did change this to REMs, and then we refreshed the page, and we saw a little bit of the spacing change in our browser. I'm going to go into the inspect element, and let's see what happened underneath the hood. So I'll click my handy dandy inspect element button here because I don't want to dig through the haystack to find this proverbial needle. And I'll click on the P tag, and let's go down to our box model, and let's see what happened. So now that we went to 1 REM, it looks like actually nothing really happened. It looks like it defaulted back to the default padding for the browser, which is 16. So if we want to take advantage of that REM, we're going to have to take another step, because REMs are based on the HTML font, which by default is 16px. But if we want to change REM, we're going to have to do one more thing, which is, just to see this in action, go ahead and in your style.css, actually this isn't in the instructions, so we're going a little bit off script. But to see an REM in action, go ahead and make an HTML rule. And here on HTML, go ahead and make a font size. And I don't know, let's make this 50 px. Because remember, REMs refer to the HTML font size. So now if we refresh, we see that now this REM, it's not even paying attention to the font size of the p tag. REMs are only concerned with the font size on the HTML. So that's an example of that. And again, the really great benefit of using REMs and EMs is because if I have a ton of content on this page and I'm using REMs as a unit of measurement, let's say that I want everything on the page to proportionally increase in size or decrease in size. If I'm using REMs, the only place I need to change that calculation is right here, the font size of my HTML. So I could go in here and put 40, for example. That wasn't too drastic. We'll change this to like 10. Cool. I think you get the idea, though. REMs are a great proportional way to adjust your site. So if you use them consistently, all you need to do is change one value, and your entire site will, grow or shrink proportionally. So it's a great strategy to keep in mind, I think. Finally, so let's use a percentage-based unit of measurement. I'm going to get rid of my HTML rule there. And so down here for padding and margin, actually, you can keep that the way it is. Let's set the width of this element to a percentage. Let's set it to 50% and see what that does for us. So I'll refresh the page. Cool. So now the width of this element is 50% of the browser window. So I can adjust it. And now it's remaining somewhat consistent, right? But let me ask you guys this. If someone wants to come off mic and shout it out. I just put a 50% unit of measurement for this element, for my P element, but it still looks like it's taking up more than 50% of my deal right here. So why is that? What are we not considering or accounting for? Yeah, Adam and Jason got it. Yeah, it's including our margin for sure. So this goes back to the earlier discussion with the box model. So it's not only the content, but it's also, perhaps margin, padding, and such. So you need to keep that in mind. If I really want this to be legitimately 50%, what I can do is I could get rid of the margin. And this should be a little bit more exact. So there we go. It's still a little bit off. I'd probably want to, maybe the border and the padding are affecting it. Let's see. Yeah, so that looks a little bit better when I took off that padding. Let's say that I did want to keep maybe the padding and the margin, or at least the padding in here. What's a property that we looked at a little bit earlier that would help me constrain that stuff? We looked at it maybe 2 exercises ago. There's another CSS property that we could use that would help us kind of rein that in. You can put it into Slack if you want. Do you guys remember that property that we could play with? So let's say that I did want margin and padding and border to still be a part of this element, but I wanted it to be 50%. There's a strategy that we could use to help contain that. You guys remember? Overflow. It's not overflow. Remember we have box sizing. And then we could do like a border box here. You can see here on my screen, you have a couple of options like border box, content box, and padding. So it's essentially saying you want this element to be 50% of the browser window, for example. does that 50% include or not include padding, margin, border, things like that? So let's see what this happens if we put a box sizing border box value on our p tag and see what this does. Cool. So that's a little bit better. So now it's still including padding. It's still including border. It's even still including margin. But it looks a little bit more 50-50 there. Actually, I think border box does not account for margin. You may want to check my math. So we'd probably need to still get rid of margin. But at least the padding is being included now as that 50% calculation. So that's a nice handy little tool that we have. Cool. Any questions about those? All right, so I think we're doing pretty well. I think we're going to get out of here in 16 minutes. So I have maybe 2 more little sections to walk through. I'm going to paste this into Slack. So just kind of a recap of some strategies when you're planning out your layout, some common techniques. So fluid layout, if you want to use this option, you can use percentage widths so that content scales with the width of the browser like we saw. And then you can use percentage widths on images. So that's a strategy. You could also use spacing in EMs. So if a user increases the font size in their browser, using pixels for spacing can be problematic. So that's a really good point. Because you know, with your mobile device, with your different devices, you can set maybe the size of the font, you know, for readability or something. So consider if you're using REMs or EMs, that if someone wants a larger view of the page by adjusting the font, that can certainly be affected proportionally if you're using EMs and REMs. So just something to keep in mind. Using EMs and REMs, this number 3 here, you can define a font size for a module on the page using REMs. So you can use EMs and REMs all over your page. If you want like a certain section to be proportionally different from some other section, you can use a combination of REMs and EMs. It's just something you want to play around with, kind of dial it in. And then number 4 here, use REMs and EMs for vertical spacing and use percentages for horizontal spacing. It's just kind of a good rule of thumb, right? So anything vertical, you could use REMs and EMs, but if you're dealing with like the height of a page, it's maybe a good idea to go with more of a percentage there. So height of images and such. Monday of week 4, we are going to investigate something called Flexbox. Has anyone heard of Flexbox before? Or maybe you played around with Flexbox? So Flexbox is becoming increasingly popular if you want to Google it. But Flexbox, so far, most of these strategies we've talked about have dealt with, you know, vertical, like making something fit vertically on the screen. What Flexbox does is it actually makes things fit vertically and horizontally. So if you have several different columns of layouts with different sizes of content or different amounts of content, maybe a news feed or something, or recipe, maybe you have like divs with recipe instructions and such. If that content is of different length, sometimes your divs can look different sizes and they don't stack up too well. But using Flexbox with CSS not only makes things nice vertically, but it also makes things nice and neat horizontally. And it's really increasingly popularly used. A lot of lees in that sentence. We're going to look at that Monday of week 4, though. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about positioning, because positioning is really important. And we're going to take a look at some of these, some examples of this, because this is definitely something you just have to like play with it to really see the behavior. But some of the high-level values that we have for our position property are static, relative positioning, absolute positioning, fixed positioning. Fixed is really popular if you want to scroll a page but have like a nav bar. We call it a sticky nav bar. If there's some piece of content that you want to stay put as you scroll through a page, we can use fixed positioning for that. And then z-index. So z-index refers to that fourth plane, so the z plane, if you will. And so it's a way to stack different divs and elements, almost like a video game, right? So, you know, with a video game, and like if you're driving a car on the freeway and you have like mountains in the background and you have trees and shrubs really closely. So the trees and shrubs are going to be like flying by, the ones that are right by the road. But maybe the mountains and stuff, as you get further in the distance, those are going to move at a different rate of speed, right? Because they're further away. So one way to mimic that effect would be using the z-index property with CSS. Has anyone heard of something called parallax? Does anyone know what parallax means? Or I'll throw an example into Slack. We've all seen it before, though maybe we didn't know that was the name of it. But parallax refers to that effect for websites where different elements move at different rates as you scroll up and down a page. So maybe the background moves a lot slower than kind of the foreground as you scroll. Yeah, actually, let me see if this is still up. I think maybe this is a good example. I'll just throw this out there real quick. So this is an example. This is one of the first sites that I built for a client. And this uses parallax. So if you want to check out that site, you can see that like the background, like the robot kind of moves at a different rate as the stuff on top of it. So we've seen this all the time, and this is just an example of parallax. And you can do that with z-index. Cool, and that brings us to some exercise time. So I'm going to paste this into Slack. And this is quite a bit of code to get us set up. So actually, for those of you that aren't able to copy my Cloud9, I'm going to paste this directly into Slack so you can copy it. So I would just suggest, in the interest of time, just go ahead and just feel free to copy this stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and blow up all the stuff inside the body of your index.html and paste that first piece of code, the div ID container with those 4 divs. So I'm going to copy that, and in my Cloud9, I'm going to put that right here in my body. I'll clean that up a little bit. And then let me give you guys some CSS if you want to copy the CSS as well. So this will give us a little bit of a setup so we can examine these position properties. Cool. And again, you can just blow up your style.css. You can just paste this over everything in that file. And then let's refresh the browser. And you should see something like this. I want you guys to see, should have like a 500 by 500 gray container with these 4 blocks inside it. So this is kind of the initial state. And we'll take a look at some positioning with this. So I'll give you just a second to get this set up. Positioning is one of those things, it's just, we just need to get in there and tinker with it to really get a feel for it. Cool. So I'm going to move forward. The first positioning example we're going to look at is relative positioning. So let's see what that looks like. I just pasted some, a screen share into Slack. What I want you guys, for this one, what I want you guys to do, we're only going to manipulate the CSS rule for this square one right here. So for the square one, we have background color, height, and width. And so underneath, we're going to add 3 more properties here. I'm going to add a top of 0. So top, left, right, and such, it kind of pins the top left-hand corner of a given element to certain coordinates on the page. So for this one, I want the very top of this square one. It's going to be at the very top of its parent container. We'll see that in just a second. So top will be 0, left is going to be 40px. So I'm going to save that and refresh my page. And nothing happens yet. So let's do a position relative. Cool. So now when we refresh, your red box, that square one, should move over 40px. And it should still be at the very top of that parent container. So the important thing to consider about relative is that relative, it's relative to its parent container. So this red box, it's not necessarily attached to the body, it's attached to the gray container that it's encapsulated in. So to see an example of that, I'm going to go into my container CSS rule. This isn't in the screen share, by the way. We're going a little just off script for a second. So let me put a top and left property here on my container. So for top, I'm just going to do like 20px, and then left, I'm going to do 20px as well. And then if I refresh, why isn't that scooting over? Make a little bit more room. Let me put a position property on here just to demonstrate this. There we go. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit more exaggerated. So do 40px and 40px there. So now if I refresh, so consider that the position relative, I just put position relative on this gray container. So the gray container belongs to the body, right? There isn't anything else outside of that container. So the container, the gray part, is 40px from the top of the body and 40px to the left of the body. From the left of the body, like it is here. Now, since I put a relative position on this red box, the red box is part of the gray box, right? The red box isn't part of the body, it's part of the gray box. So when I do position relative on the red box, it moves in proportion, or it moves around the inside of the gray box, not the body. So since it's contained by the gray box, the parent container, that's what it moves in relation to, hence the word relative. Cool, so that's an example of relative positioning. I'm going to get rid of those 3 extra container rules or properties so we can take a look at the next example. And the next example is static positioning. So I'll put the screenshot into Slack. Now, static positioning is the default. So we rarely use static positioning. Now, you may want to throw static positioning in there, again, if you're doing like some DOM manipulation, if you're using some JavaScript or some jQuery, maybe you want to be very explicit with this property. But the important thing to remember with static positioning is that all elements are pretty much statically positioned out of the box. They're just positioned the way that they're written in the HTML. No big secret here. If you look at the screen share there, a statically positioned element is always positioned according to the normal flow of the page, and it's not affected by the top, bottom, left, and right properties. So for the most part, it's just the way that the flow of the page goes. So if we were to put a position of static on the container box, the ID of container, we shouldn't see any difference. There shouldn't be any change to our web page. Let's move forward to fixed positioning. So this is a really fun one. And again, this is really good for sticky nav bars, or maybe if you want a footer to stay in the same place, even if you scroll up and down. If you want some element to remain fixed, this is a good way to do that. So for this one, let's put on square 2 in the CSS, let's add a couple of different properties here. So we're going to add a position of fixed. If I can spell. And let's put some coordinates here. Let's do a top of 0 and a left of 0, like so. So the square, square number 2 is this blue one right here. So if I refresh the page, so notice what happens. So now this blue square, fixed refers to the body. So fixed, the fixed positioning, it's the body, it's the browser window itself. And so now the coordinates for this blue box, the very top left corner of this blue box has the coordinate of 0, 0, right? Top of 0, left of 0. Now, I want you guys to really see this in action. I can't really scroll right now because all of my content's on this one page. So what I want you guys to do is shrink down the browser window and then scroll, and you'll notice that that blue box stays in the same spot. It doesn't scroll with the rest of the page. I'm going to do that now, and I just want to give you a heads up that if you're looking at my Cloud9, it may resize it kind of weird, so I just want to warn you for that. But I'm going to resize my browser, and you guys can watch this in action. So I'll make it kind of like tiny right here. And so now, when I scroll up and down the page, notice that that blue box doesn't move, right? Because it's fixed. It's fixed positioning to the browser, to the body, to the main content. So this is really good, like if you want a sticky nav bar or something, if you want some piece of content that doesn't move, this is a really great strategy for that. Cool. And I think that's a good place to put a pin in it. So it's 1:30, definitely want to give you guys some lunch time. I'm going to stop my screen share. Cool. Any questions about any of the stuff that we've covered? We have just a couple more rules to look at. We'll take a look after lunch. No worries. We'll have time. But any questions before we head out to lunch? All right, cool. Well, great work this morning. You are dismissed. Have a great lunch, and we'll see you at 2:30 p.m. Eastern.
Hey, Christine. Was it you or Matt that was going to help with
I think it was Matt. Sorry, hold on one second. Mark, are you still online? Can you stop recording?